Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own Little Bat Pup, or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Johannes_motivational_insults, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by me, Britt. Little Bat Pup Chapter 2. Slouching back in her chair, Nicta sips her beer and rolls her eyes up to the ceiling, absorbing the intricate architecture. This reception hall is one of the nicer buildings on base, but it has a certain coldness to its design that's not especially welcoming. Then again, Nicta hardly feels welcome anywhere at Fort Salem. She technically has been for a few years, but she knows plenty of people in the army haven't forgiven her for creating the spree, and they certainly haven't forgotten. Nicta does have fond memories of this place. It was her home for 2 years. It was the place she really found her power and blossomed into the ass-kicker she is to this day. But it was the heart of enemy territory for so long, the fortress of her greatest foe. She doubts she'll ever feel entirely comfortable here again, which is unfortunate given that her wife works here whenever she's not deployed. Eyes dropping with a sigh, Nicta finds the woman in question easily. Tally is tearing up the dance floor with her unit, non-alcoholic drink in hand, not slowed down at all by the conspicuous bump under her uniform top. How she still has all that energy at 6 months pregnant, Nicta has no clue, but she's happy to let Tally's unit tire her out. Nicta's pushing 55 at this point, and as much as she refuses to look or act her age, she does feel it some days. Even when she's shifted into her younger form and doesn't feel the aches and pains of aging directly, she feels the fatigue in her bones. She envies Sarah and her perfect body, restored to pristine condition during the little nap in the mushroom web. No one should be that old and in such good shape. Out on the dance floor, the unit is doing their part. Honestly, they might be doing a little too much. This is the party of a formal event after all, and they're getting a little bit handsy, Bellwether in particular. That's hardly a surprise, of course. The little shit turned out to be just as much a ladykiller as a man-eater once she figured out she liked it both ways. And Collar can woo any woman she wants with her swagger and sad eyes, so of course she can touch Tally any way she pleases. It's not like her wife cares, nor Bellwether's husband for that matter. Nicta does care, but not for the reason you would think. She was a soldier too once, and she's well aware of the inevitable fuckfest on any front line. Even in supposedly peaceful zones, soldiers prefer to stay fully charged to increase their odds of survival should a fight break out. It's not like sleeping around is frowned upon anyway, polyamory being the norm in witch culture. But the military has definitely exacerbated that tendency by requiring them to use so much power in combat. It blurs the lines of enthusiastic consent just enough to make Nicta uncomfortable. She's fine with Tally charging up with her unit in the field. She just wishes it wasn't something she had to do out of necessity. Admittedly, she wasn't always so laid back about it. Tally and Collar have always had this weird thing between them. Feelings that toe the line between platonic and romantic, and it used to make Nicta nervous. She usually doesn't mind Tally having sex with or having feelings for other people, which is a good thing because Tally seems to fall in love about 100 times a day. But their closeness was intimidating, and Nicta couldn't help fearing she'd lose her special place in Tally's heart. She still does, sometimes, even after more than 4 years together. But Collar doesn't feel like a threat anymore, not after the conversations they've had. Power boosts are one thing, but she's emotionally committed to her wife, just like Nicta is to hers. Sex with other people isn't off the table for Nicta either, especially when Tally's deployed, but she can't say she's particularly interested. While she was a total dog at some points in her life, she's never been the type to sleep around once she falls in love, like in Liberia, for instance. Sarah filled Nicta's yawning, yearning heart all on her own, satiating her thirst for connection in a way she'd never known was possible. Then she smashed it into bits. For 27 years, Nicta kept its brittle remains closely guarded, terrified of risking such intimacy again, such vulnerability again. And just when she was starting to trust Tally to help her piece it back together, Sarah almost fucked her over again. Nicta still remembers the look on Tally's face when they got the call at the safe house, Quartermain relaying the news to them over speakerphone. Tally looked like she was going to pass out from shock and happiness. She and Tally were barely together at that point, but Nicta felt a possessive, protective surge course through her body at the sight. Sarah had already taken so much from her. How could she not fear it happening again? And how could she trust Sarah with Tally after what she'd done to her? Their early days back on base didn't ameliorate those fears at all. Tally started going to Sarah for mentorship like before, and Sarah was all too interested in helping Tally hone her emerging gifts. And in Tally herself. Nicta could see it. She wasn't blind. Sarah used to look at her like that too, before she betrayed her and broke her heart. So one day, she cornered Sarah in her office and told her she was onto her, and she'd better back the fuck off. Sarah denied any ill will towards Tally, assuring Nicta that she only had the best of intentions for her, but that was hardly a comfort. "I finally have something going for me again, Sarah," Nicta sneered in that moment. Though a slight hitch in her voice betrayed her. "The least you could do is not steal this from me too." Tears welled in her eyes and in Sarah's. Then Sarah nodded quietly and backed the fuck off. They don't talk about it much. It's easier not to. But Sarah's still a big part of their lives, continuing to mentor Tally and even forging a fledgling, if awkward, friendship with Nicta. She's kind of hard to get rid of. Hell, the army only managed to get rid of her today. The ceremony was all the pomp and circumstance anybody could ask for. Nicta flicked her lighter open and shut throughout the whole ordeal, torn between feeling happy for Sarah and proud of her decision to step down and feeling intensely uncomfortable about the whole thing. It might have been easier with Tally by her side, but she was up at the front with the other soldiers, leaving Nicta to dodge curious glances and hostile glares alone. Sarah rose to the occasion, of course. Her speech was moving but oh so precise, worded carefully in advance, perhaps over several decades. She no doubt expected to retire as a top general, rather than in the power-sharing, mentoring arrangement she worked out with Petra. But not much wording would have had to change. There were some obvious more recent touches, however. "When we thought my time was up," she said at one point, "I had a wise young soldier by my side who told me that I could set down my burden of leadership and let them take it from there. And she was right. The army turned out to be more than capable in my absence. But I'm glad I had the chance to come back and help with the transition. I am beyond grateful for the mother's intervention, for this second chance at life, this second chance to serve my country and its people." Nicta could swear Sarah looked right at her when she said, "More than anything, I am grateful for the chance to correct my mistakes and attempt to make amends." That last part definitely wasn't written long in advance. The Sarah Alder who went into the mycelium was all but incapable of admitting her mistakes, much less apologizing for them. The reborn version seems to have had some sense smacked into her, not to mention a large dose of humility. She's still a stubborn ass, but she's not an immovable object anymore. Nicta supposes she has Tally to thank for that. Not only did her insubordination save Nicta's life, it humbled Sarah and helped her see the error of her ways, much like what she did for Nicta. Nicta loves that woman so much. She owes her literally everything. The spree would have come to nothing if not for her. She would have come to nothing if it was not for her. "Is this seat taken?" asks a familiar voice, pulling Nicta from her thoughts. Nicta lets her head loll back to find Sarah standing behind her. Her energy an endearing mix of confident and awkward. She gives a casual shrug in return, indicating her wife on the dance floor. Not for now. Taking the implied invitation, Sarah eases herself down to Nicta's right. Placing a pair of tumblers on the table, she asks, "Fancy something a little stronger?" "Whiskey, no doubt. 80 proof. The woman is predictable." "Trying to get me drunk, Alder?" drawls Nicta, eyeing her like a lazy tiger. "You know it'll take more than that. I'm not a lightweight like you." Sarah huffs, scooting her chair forward with a little more force than necessary. "That was one time, Nicta, and I really wish you'd let it go." Nicta snickers at the mere suggestion, like she would ever forget one of the funniest and most heartbreaking nights of her life. Not long after the confrontation over Tally, Sarah requested a meeting with Nicta to clear the air and find a way to work together, given the ward they'd been thrown into. Because Sarah is Sarah, there was whiskey involved. But it turned out that over the last 250 years of food and drink having no effect on her, she'd completely lost her alcohol tolerance. In those years, she could knock back all she wanted, and the biddies were permabuzzed. Probably why they hissed all the fucking time. But her body metabolized none of it. So when she was restored to her mortal form, her liver was basically useless. As the drinks piled up while she and Nicta attempted to hash out their issues, Sarah got increasingly emotional and forthcoming, which was disconcerting for obvious reasons. What the fuck? And the whole thing culminated in her weeping into Nicta's lap about how she'd never wanted to hurt her, and how she wished she could take it all back, and how Nicta's the love of her life. Oh, and then throwing up on Nicta's boots. It was pathetic and adorable. Nicta found herself torn between grinning and fuming at the whole display. She could appreciate Sarah finally apologizing, but it was a few decades too late. And honestly, Sarah's fucking nerve to beg for forgiveness kind of pissed her off. The confession of undying love was a whole other thing that left her even more fucked up. It made her heart skip and thrum, made it undeniable that a part of her had waited nearly 30 years to hear those words. She hated that part of her, hated that Sarah somehow still had a hold on her. Mostly she just hated Sarah. "Wish all you want," says Nicta. "It's never gonna happen." Sarah shifts in her seat, eyes on her tumbler as she turns it idly, making a crunching noise against a glass tabletop. "I guess that's my burden to bear," she murmurs. "Can't set them all down, can I?" Nicta squints back at her, a sneaking suspicion in her gut that they're not talking about Sarah's most embarrassing moment anymore. But Sarah misses the unspoken request for clarification, her gaze on the table and then on the dance floor. Gesturing stiffly in the direction, she remarks, "Sergeant Craven is really starting to show." It's hardly a smooth segue, but Nicta doesn't want to deal with whatever this is anyway, so she opts to roll with it. "That she is," she concurs, lips twisting into a smile as she watches Tally throw her head back with laughter. That woman and that bump are her world. "I still can't believe that worked," muses Sarah. Nicta's eyelids flutter. "Huh? Your shape-shifting stunt." Eyes sliding over with a soft smile, Sarah concedes. "Then again, it's not the first time you've repackaged your magic in incredible ways." "Emphasis on package," cracks Nicta, eyebrows waggling suggestively. Sarah rolls her eyes but can't contain her smirk. Directing it back out at the floor, she sips her whiskey and remarks, "It's a shame you hadn't figured it out in Liberia." Nicta almost chokes on her drink. Sarah must be feeling it already. Even this new version of her is far too proper to make comments like that, especially to a married woman. Stars, what a scandal. Nicta, on the other hand, has always been shameless. Married women, superior officer, who gives a fuck? She does. She gives all the fucks, even when it's a terrible idea. "Oh, was the strap not enough for you?" she teases, leering up at Sarah. "I don't remember any complaints." "No complaints," clarifies Sarah, shifting awkwardly. "It's just... It would be different if it was just you." Her head tips slightly, gaze curious and strangely vulnerable. "Isn't it different?" That hint of vulnerability triggers Nicta's predatory instincts, and she grins, staring Sarah down with smoldering eyes. "Wouldn't you like to know?" Sarah visibly shivers at her raspy tone, filling Nicta with a kind of bone-deep satisfaction she has missed. She always enjoys having that effect on women, of course, but when it's Sarah, it's something else. Unlike Tally, Sarah's so very put together, all the time. Making her fall apart is a challenge, and a rewarding one indeed. She's also one of the most beautiful women Nicta's ever seen. Magnetic crystal eyes, legs for days, a jawline she would pay to impale her. Sarah's a trophy in every sense of the word. But Nicta has already won her, and lost her. She knows that sullied brass all too well, cut her teeth on it, chips and rough edges. She's never touching it again. She wouldn't, even if it weren't for Tally. Still, Nicta has her pride. So she holds Sarah's gaze until she drags her eyes away with what appears to be monumental effort. Surveying the dance floor again, Sarah clears her throat. "You all set at home?" she inquires. The subject change once again, about as subtle as a brick. It won't be long now. "We have like 3 months," Nicta points out, mostly to be contrary. She's on top of that shit. The cradle thing was Tally's fault. "And it'll be gone in a flash," Sarah professes, in what I know everything voice she is so good at. Nicta rolls her eyes. "Everything's a flash to you. You're fucking ancient. And full of wisdom." "If you say so," snorts Nicta. "At least I know better than to make my wife cry in Marshall's over a onesie of all things," remarks Sarah, eyes narrowing with the accusation. Nicta groans inwardly. Those fucking narcs. Why can't anyone in the army mind their own business? "You've never even handfested, and you're giving me marriage advice?" she shoots back. It's a low blow, but it's also true. Sarah hardens her gaze, but her posture relaxes as she turns in, setting Nicta with an intimate, serious look. "Nick, I know," mutters Nicta, eyes dropping. "You promised you'd be good to her." "I know," she snaps, glaring up at her. "We bought the damn batsuit, Sarah. Give me a fucking break." Sarah's eyes narrow slightly, studying her intently. "What's wrong, Nick?" Head shaking, Nicta turns back to the dance floor. "Nothing's wrong." "Yes, there is. And if I can tell, that's saying a lot," insists Sarah. "That may not be entirely true. Yes, Sarah Alder has the emotional intelligence of a shriveled walnut, but she also knows Nicta better than almost anyone on earth. She's seen her at her best and her worst. She knows what makes her tick, all her weaknesses, and how to manipulate them, how to manipulate her. She's a dangerous person to open up to, but also one of the few people Nicta can open up to. Crossing her arms over her chest, Nicta grumbles. "She was making fun of me." "What?" asks Sarah. "Who was?" "Tally," Nicta clarifies, hand waving dismissively. "With a batsuit. Said she could get one for me, when, like," she screws her face up in a scowl. "I'm the knight." Where Nicta was hoping to find sympathy, or at least understanding, she finds only a wry smirk and arched eyebrow. She throws her hands up. "Sarah! She met you skulking around in the forest in a dramatic hooded cloak, using bats as familiars after attempting to murder me twice, Nicta," Sarah deadpans. "First impressions die hard." "Sure," scoffs Nicta, "but back then she was actually scared of me." Sarah's perfect fucking eyebrow rises just a little bit higher. "You want your wife to be scared of you?" "No! I just don't want her to mock me and act like it was all some stupid act," explains Nicta. "Like I'm just some cute dumb baby playing tough, not the founder of a formidable international ring of freedom fighters." Chuckling to herself, Sarah remarks, "To me, you are a cute dumb baby playing tough, but I'm 6 times your age. I don't think that counts." Nicta groans, out loud this time, and Sarah apparently decides to take pity on her. Reaching out to touch her forearm where it rests on the arm of her chair, Nicta narrows her eyes, but doesn't protest just yet, waiting to hear what she has to say. "I understand," Sarah tells her, completely serious this time. "You want her to respect you in your life's work. You want her to have faith in your abilities, believe you could protect her and your child." Nicta scoffs, shaking her head. "Sure, something like that. It's not quite the way she would have worded it, but it's true enough. But she already does. Believe me," insists Sarah. Her hand closes around Nicta's arm, gripping it softly but intently. Truly, Nicta, you have no idea how highly Tally thinks of you. Feeling her cheeks tingling with oncoming heat, Nicta ducks her head slightly, biting her lip to hold on a smile. I don't know. She likes to tell me, especially in bed. But do you really believe it? Asks Sarah. When Nicta opens her mouth, she quickly tacks on, outside of the obvious, no one's calling your bedroom skills into question. Especially not you, remarks Nicta. Quirking an eyebrow, Sarah quips, I think those were 10 skills, technically. Nicta smirks into her tumbler, tosses back the remainder in one shot and savors the burn. It reminds her of happier times. The good old days, before everything went to shit. She used to not to be able to remember those days without intense pain, but since they began repairing their relationship, it has softened to a dull ache. Something bittersweet that can bring a smile to her face. A sad smile, but a smile nonetheless. You know Tally teases to show affection, Sarah reminds her, as though she needs reminding. Yeah, I know, mutters Nicta. Usually I can take it too. Yes, but you've always been sensitive about feeling disrespected and underestimated, Sarah points out. She says it so casually, like that isn't an incredibly personal attack. Don't think I don't remember. Nicta scoffs. Been taking your memory vitamins, old woman? Smirking playfully, Sarah points out. You're grayer than me. Well, you cheated, Nicta shoots back. You're the one wearing a face 20 years out of date, parries Sarah. Her eyes both narrow and soften, a pensive look coming over her face. Does Tally even know what you actually look like? Pfft, of course she does. She's my wife. Batting her eyelashes, Nicta jokes. But what lady my age leaves the house without putting her face on? Truthfully, Nicta doesn't look a day over 45, even without the mask. A little ragged, perhaps, but she never lost her baby face. Her hair is another story, obviously, but she actually doesn't mind the gray streaks slowly but surely taking over. She thinks it makes her look distinguished. It definitely makes people take her more seriously, especially when she has the mask on. Lips twitching upward, Sarah idly swirls her tumbler. I bet you're still beautiful. Nicta scoffs. Of course I am. You think this face could ever get ugly? Never, declares Sarah. Meeting Nicta's gaze with an uncharacteristic shyness, she admits, I hope I get a chance to see it one day. Giving it a hum and a shrug, Nicta remarks, Play your cards right. Okay, she really needs to stop hitting on her hot traitor's ex, who is still in love with her and has a mutual thing with her wife. That's just too messy. Nicta's finally gotten a bit of stability in her life. She should really know better than to fuck it all up over a pretty girl. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be something she ever grew out of. Tally's evidence enough of that. Still, she needs to show restraint. Nicta is literally flirting with disaster here, in more ways than one. Sarah Alder ruins people. That's what she does. She's ruined Nicta, and she nearly ruined Tally. And sure, maybe she's working on herself now, but can you really teach an old dog new tricks when she's that fucking old? If Nicta can't learn not to flirt, can Sarah really learn not to use people, or to listen to anyone but herself, or goddess forbid, say what she fucking means? Sarah raises an eyebrow, her expression somewhere between impassive and cheeky. I'll keep that in mind, she deadpans. Thank God as Tally picks that moment to intervene, saving Nicta from another awkward staring contest she feels fated to lose this time. Astonishingly light on her feet in her condition, she skirts around Sarah's side of the table with a knowing smirk. Now what kind of trouble are you two getting up to over here? She demands teasingly. Do I need to call in a peacekeeping force? You are the peacekeeping force, Nicta informs her dryly. A light blush surfaces on Tally's face, but she raises a doubtful eyebrow. You mean you two get along just for me? Sarah clears her throat, straightening into a more formal posture. Staying in your good graces is a powerful motivator, she admits. That's right. We wouldn't want any more embarrassing executions, would we? Teases Nicta. Now we don't have to worry about that, Sarah states pointedly, and now it's not at all inappropriate for me to ask, standing from her chair. She offers Tally a hand. Sergeant Craven, may I have this dance? A flustered smile sprouts on Tally's face, but she hesitates, with her hand inches from Sarah's, glancing down at Nicta for approval. Despite her misgivings, Nicta forces her lip upwards. Yes, it makes her a little uncomfortable, but she doesn't want to be a control freak, and she definitely doesn't want to ruin Sarah's special day. Huh, imagine that. You don't need my permission, she says nonchalantly, waving them away. It's true, and Tally knows it. Still, Nicta's glad she asked. Just because it's Sarah. Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own, and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.